Hi, I'm Joe Saunders of Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this episode, we're going to put Army Painter's speed paints to the test. We're going to try to paint an entire battalion of 28mm French Napoleonic models as fast as possible. So let's get down to work and see what results we can get. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is proudly supported by these sponsors. In the last few months, I've been busy preparing for hot lead. That means that I've been working on terrain. Lots of it. But this has created a bit of an issue. While I've been sculpting foam and doing my best to create engaging miniature environments, my son and regular opponent, Mitchell, has been painting Napoleonic allies. Hordes of them. His model selection has been growing in leaps and bounds, all lined up, ready for the next big game of black powder or sharp practice. I, however, have more pretty flowers, I guess? And so, my French forces are badly outnumbered. This has led to an issue really only a fanatical miniature painter can have. I don't have enough troops to meet him for a suitably cataclysmic battle on my fancy new terrain. An issue that must be rectified. So I need to paint lots of new French troops fast, to prepare for the next big game, hopefully coming up next weekend. You have to understand something first, though, here. I'm not really a fast painter. My approach is to compromise quality with reasonable time frames. I don't cut corners. Until now. I have in my collection the full range of Army Painter's speed paints, so it's time to really put these to the test. What follows isn't so much a tutorial, but an experiment to document my attempts at a speed painting method that meets my own standards and gets models on the table. To do this, I'm going to attempt to paint an entire battalion of Warlord Miniatures French line troops at a breakneck speed, at least by my standards. Will it work? Maybe. So, let the experiment begin. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank my Patreon supporters. Without their assistance, Miniature Landscape Hobbies would not be possible. If you would like to learn more about the benefits of becoming a Patreon supporter, please check the link in the video description. When I work on a Napoleonic Infantry battalion, which is usually about 20 to 24 models, I budget around 1.5 weeks for the project. I work a few hours a day. This pace, of course, won't work for this video, so I began by using the hot new model painting rage, Zenithal painting. After building the models, which was straightforward, because most of the models in the kit are only 3 parts, I undercoated them with matte black spray paint. Then I went and dusted them in a more or less downward motion with gray. This gives a foundation of shades to build on. To complete the highlights, though, I now poured out some white paint and began dry brushing. And dry brushing, and dry brushing. I decided to work in batches of about 10 models, but I went to do these beginning steps all at once, and so it took a while. Eventually, though, I was done and could move forward. And here we get to see the speed paints work their magic. All you need to do is find the area you want to block in with one color at a time, and just go ahead. This was made easier by the subject, as most of the models are in great coats that historically varied quite a bit in color. I used mainly pallid bone, but jumped around with runic gray, sand golem, gravelord gray, and hardened leather. Sometimes I varied the colors on the shako covers. Hardened leather was particularly useful, as it could also do the backpacks and muskets. Lastly, a few of the models were in traditional French uniforms, so the blue areas got a coat of Warlord blue. All of this went according to plan, and I must say, the speed paints made this fun. They flow great, so I could use a largish brush, and it was very satisfying to watch the highlights emerge as the paint dries. Now came the black areas, and again I just simply took grim black and blocked the areas in. I do find that the darker the speed paint, the more opaque it dries, so I added some thinner to this one. 3 drops was about what it took. This was all smooth sailing so far. Everything was going down with one coat, and the results were acceptable for rank and file models. Then the snag happened, the color white. I actually was pretty sure this would happen. I applied holy white to the parts of the uniform details that needed it, and when it dried, the results were, well, not very good. White's hard to paint, so I didn't get too upset, but I would need to go back and use some traditional layering. I poured out white and thinned it quite a bit. Then I brushed a raised highlight onto each model. V1 speed paints reactivate when layered, but I don't really have an issue with this. It allowed subtle blends with my white highlight, and after it dried, it looked okay. But I must say, this did slow the process down significantly, which brings me to the flesh tones. I knew from previous experience that V1 speed paint flesh color is not very good. I'm sure this will be fixed in the future, but I would need to use layering on the faces. If I didn't, the result would not look good combined with my existing models. I began by painting dark brown over the skin, then using a fine brush, added flat flesh. I let the dark brown show in the recesses and around the edges. Now I gave the raised areas, like noses and chins, a light flesh highlight. It looked good, but to unify it, I washed all of the skin with Army Painter Flesh Wash. This is how I do all my Caucasian skin tones, but for character models or officers, I would re-highlight with light flesh and or white. But as I was going for speed here, I didn't do that. Now I was on the homeward stretch, and it was back to the simple task of blocking in colors with the speed paints. Grenadiers got slaughter red epaulettes and plumes. Orc flesh was applied to the voltigeurs. The other units were given pom-poms in the appropriate colors. Most experienced painters leave metallics for late in the process because they tend to contaminate other areas of the model. But now I decided it was time. I also don't have any speed paint metallics yet. Why? Well, at the time of this video, they're just hitting the shelves. No problem though, I have the gold and chainmail paints from Color Express, which is the Vallejo equivalent to speed paints. Chainmail went on the musket barrels and bayonets. Gold went on sword hilts and the small details. I was now down to lining in. First I applied satin varnish to protect my work, and then I had a decision to make. Lining in, where you take dark colors like black and go around the edges of details to boost contrast, is a must in my opinion. But it's slow. Sure, you can use enamel, which flows with capillary action to speed it all up, but it still takes time. Except there's also another possibility: oil paints. Taking black oil paints, I heavily thinned it until it flowed freely. Then, with a largish but worn-out brush, I stippled the oil paint into place, allowing the thinner and varnish to help everything flow. This was quick. No more than 10 to 15 seconds per model to get decent coverage. Now it was time to base everything. I have a super fast technique for this, using the rubbing alcohol method. So this is what I used. I've covered this method repeatedly in other videos, so I'll put a link up on it above, rather than cover it all over again here. Suffice it to say though, it's very fast and effective. With the basing done, I could now proceed with the finishing touches, like this flag. And then, moving on to the end step, I gave everything 2 coats of matte varnish. With that, everything was finished. So, how did it all turn out? Pretty well, I think. When ranked up in movement trays, these line troops fit in among their other layer-painted friends just fine. And I think they'll do the job nicely on the games table, especially since it took me just 3 days from start to finish. And, in fact, I actually did 28 models in the end, more than 1 battalion. So if it takes me about 12 days to do an equivalent amount of models, that means that with speed paints, I worked at least a whopping 75% faster. I'm not exaggerating here. I was stunned at these results. Now, don't get me wrong, these models are not display quality by any stretch of the imagination. If you line them up with my character models, well, they just don't really compare. But this was never my intention. Mixed in with the rank and file, these guys look just great. So, this experiment can be considered a success. I was happy enough that you are sure to see this method over again in some of my future videos, but with minor tweaks, of course.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please remember to subscribe, press the bell button so you get immediate notification on our videos, and until next time, remember to keep building life in miniature.